Welcome to the Allegheny Beach Conference of Surgeons.
Hello. Welcome back to AEC Camp Meeting. We thank you for joining us. Sorry about that. Thank you for joining us for our live discussion on vaccine hesitancy. We have been enjoying a wonderful week about being undefeated, and we also don't want to be undefeated as we want to be. Don't want to be, or we want to be undefeated as it relates to our health, I should say. And so we wanted to have this conversation today with an expert medical panel. Throughout, ever since the pandemic started, we have had a commitment as a conference to make sure that we're educating you, sharing information with you, not just about the pandemic and COVID-19, but also now the vaccine. And this is just a continued part of our dedication to providing you with as much information as we can to keep you educated during these times. We do have 3 wonderful guests that I'm about to bring on. I'm going to do that at this time. Let's give them a wonderful AEC welcome. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Welcome. All of these wonderful people come from the White Oak Medical Center, which is located in Maryland. We're gonna get to know each and every one of them. Just to give you all an idea of the format for today, as we've done this a few times with different formats. We're going to introduce them. Well, I'll start off with a word of prayer before I introduce them briefly. They will present for about 30 minutes, sharing information that will be helpful to you. And then we'll spend the last half of our discussion taking your questions. So as you're listening to the information, we do invite you to put your questions in the chat, whether it's on YouTube or Facebook, and we'll get to those at the tail end, because you never know, they may answer your questions during the presentation. So before we jump into our introductions, just bow your heads with me as we open up with a word of prayer. Father, we just want to thank you for this opportunity once again to come together. Thank you for the knowledge that you've provided the individuals who will share with us today. We thank you for our constituents and friends who are here to learn as much as they can so they can make educated decisions for themselves and their families. We ask that you will please join us during this time. Help everyone to be respectful of this conversation that we're having. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you all once again. As I said, we will start off with a presentation, and then that will be followed by questions. Of course, we just want to put it out there. We're expecting everyone to be respectful in the comments. We will be removing any comments that we find to be inappropriate, but we trust that you will. Okay, so before we jump into the presentation, we're going to start off first by introducing Ada Bakludi. She is the Director of Infection Prevention at Adventist Healthcare, which is part of the White Oak Medical Center is a part of. Ada, just tell us a little bit about what you do in your role.
Sure, of course. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ada Bakludi, and as was stated, I'm the Director of Infection Prevention for White Oak Medical Center. And my department is charged with preventing healthcare-associated infections in our hospital. And it's our duty to our patients and to our healthcare workers and our visitors to keep them safe from an infection perspective. So we spent a lot of time researching the literature, coming up with best practice, and working with our fine clinicians to do just that. And I am very happy to speak with you today.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you very much. And then we have Dr. Asante Dixon, who is part of the neuroradiology staff. He's a specialist at White Oak Medical Center. Tell us what you do as part of your role, Dr. Dixon.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sante Dixon. I am part of the White Oak Medical Center family. I am a neuroradiologist, so my daily clinical duties encompass diagnosing and treating diseases with a specialty in the brain and the spine, but I do go to other different parts of the body if necessary. And also I am very interested and I pursue a lot of lecturing and interaction in healthcare equity. And so I'm hoping that today, between the three of us, we can assist people in better understanding where we are currently with the vaccine and getting some perspective as to how health equity can be improved in the American medical system.
Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And at the bottom right there, we have Dr. James Rost. Dr. Rost, you have a pretty important role there at White Oak Medical Center. Tell us about what you do. You have a lot on your plate, huh?
Well, thank you, Latasha, and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jim Rost, and I serve as Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center's Chief Medical Officer. My training is as a pediatrician and a newborn intensive care doctor, and so my role as the Chief Medical Officer, or CMO, is really to help bridge the gap between our clinicians like Dr. Dixon and Ada and our administration, and really try to coordinate and impact and improve the care we provide to our patients 24/7. There is a lot on my plate, but that's healthcare. There's a lot on Ada's plate, on Asante Dixon's plate, everybody's plate. But I could not be more honored to be here this afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yes, and thank you all for being so willing with your busy schedules. So we're not going to delay any further. We're going to allow you all to jump right into the presentation. So we're going to pull that up at this time and allow you all to do what you do best. There we go.
Okay, excellent. Are we set up, or is the presentation live?
Yes, we're good to go.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much for having us here today. My portion of the presentation is really going to focus on describing the 3 approved vaccinations in the United States. We're going to talk a little bit about the vaccine approval process. And I know there are a lot of burning questions about what is an mRNA vaccination, what is a vector vaccination. We're going to go over at a very high level what that means. And we're going to talk a little bit about side effects, and then we'll move on in the discussion. So just to go ahead and get started, last year, and even now, it's such a challenge, and no words can really describe what we've all been feeling, especially around the very sobering statistic of 600,000 American lives lost from COVID-19. And I know, as many of you, I've been feeling, some of the anxiety around COVID and where are we going and what's all this talk about variants. And we'll go over that later in the discussion. But as we kind of come down the other side, I know I was really excited to start visiting my parents again, start going back to church, start visiting friends and restaurants. And all of that is really centering around vaccination. And the more vaccination that we encounter, what the data is showing is that we have diminishing numbers of COVID-19 infections, diminishing deaths. To date in the United States, just over 150 million Americans are fully vaccinated, and that number is climbing. So one of the things that we get questioned about a lot is that, the vaccine development seemed really, really fast. And I like to sort of rebrand that a little bit. It was actually more efficient. And I say that because, and you'll see the arrow, if you could just sort of follow from left to right, the research and development portion of that block was already done. In fact, RNA technology has been used in various cancer treatment modalities, was used to develop vaccines for Zika, Ebola virus. So we had an amazing head start, and researchers were able to apply that science to COVID-19 and begin preclinical trials. And what that means is in vitro study in the laboratory, and also some animal studies. What was interesting about phase 1, 2, and 3 is that in the United States, we had significant government support to do those trials. And phase 1, 2, and 3 really include human trials. And under Operation Warp Speed, there was significant government financial support to make the trials happen and get us where we need to be. And that was quite different from the past because obviously we were in a public health emergency, and the government was able to prioritize those funds to making the trials happen. Phase 1 really includes just about 100 people. Phase 2, once phase 1 was successful, include hundreds of people. And in phase 3, that's where we really get some really good data because we're including data around tens of thousands of people. And so what would ordinarily happen is then the researchers will then submit their drug to the FDA for a BLA. But because there was a public health emergency, the FDA did approve the vaccines for immediate use. And so you have an EUA or an emergency use authorization for the use of these vaccinations. So it did seem fast, but a lot of the pre-work was already done, thankfully. So here in the United States, we have 3 approved vaccinations. They should be familiar to most, but I'll go through them. Pfizer is an mRNA vaccination. Moderna is an mRNA vaccination. And Johnson & Johnson is a vector vaccination. And I'll go into exactly what that means in a moment. If you are receiving the Pfizer vaccination, it's a 2-shot series with 21 days in between both injections. And then 2 weeks after your second shot, the Pfizer vaccine confers a 95% efficacy. Moderna, also an mRNA vaccination, has a 2-shot sequence with 28 days spanning both shots. And again, 2 weeks after your second shot, it has about a 94.5% efficacy. And then lastly, Johnson & Johnson is just 1 shot. And 2 weeks after that shot, you have just over 70% protection. So what is exactly, how exactly does an mRNA vaccination work? Well, mRNA vaccines, as I mentioned, Pfizer and Moderna, really are a single-stranded genetic code that's enwrapped in a lipid membrane for delivery to our cells. When the mRNA is delivered to our cells, immediately our cells will make a protein, and in the case of coronavirus, it is making a spike protein for presentation and then also the stimulation of our immune system to make antibodies. And that's a very sort of high level description. But once our bodies make antibodies, then it is understood then that is how we get protection from future infection by COVID-19. A vector vaccine is similar, though slightly different in that it is a double-stranded vector vaccine. And what that means is the vector is another harmless virus that is used to transport the COVID-19 spike protein DNA into our cells, where it makes the mRNA to then produce the protein to then stimulate our immune system. So the mRNA vaccines are a little different in the sense that it does skip one step, and because the mRNA is directly delivered to our cell, it can immediately make that protein that our immune system needs to create antibodies. So I know there's been a lot of talk about variants, and you'll see the 4 variants of concern listed there, but most of us are hearing a lot about the Delta variant, which initially emerged out of India. It is a double mutant variant, and what's interesting about virus or virology is that every single time the virus gets a chance to replicate, so does the chance for mutation also emerge. And so the more people we can get vaccinated, the less likely the virus will have to mutate. And so at this point, the variants have not changed enough that they are unrecognizable to the immune system of vaccinated persons. And we get a lot of questions about, if I got COVID, and I'm exposed to COVID-19 again or some sort of variant, I should be okay, right? I don't need a vaccination. And at this point, we actually don't have a guarantee that if you had COVID in the past, that that immune response will be enough to protect you from subsequent infection. And so vaccinations are tested and approved. There is a lot of data to support their use. And so that is our standard now for fighting COVID-19. So in short, vaccination is key. If we really want to stop the variants, we have to figure out a way to stop the virus. And so it's one of the ways, one of the reasons rather, that we're supporting the use of the vaccination. And before I shift the discussion to Dr. Rost, I'm hoping that everyone is feeling better informed, and you have at least a sense of the science around vaccinations, and we'll actually answer additional questions that you might have at the end of the discussion. But I like to challenge you to think about getting a vaccine. I like to think of the healing really starts here. One of the things that I really miss was getting out and hugging people, and I'm happy to do that again.
Okay, thank you very much, Ada. Next slide, please. Thank you, Ada, for providing us with the overview, high-level overview of the science, explaining that the vaccines are safe. Next slide is great. That they prevent hospitalizations. We know that they also prevent death, and they're important to rid us of pandemics. But trust in vaccines is still low amongst some of us. How do we build trust in a new vaccine designed to impact a new virus that we may not know everything about yet? So from a scientific standpoint, Ada's right. It's efficient, it's a spectacular achievement, but from a public point of view, many of us, including myself, were saying, hold on, that is way, way too fast. We have doubts, we're tentative, and some of us are hesitant. Part of our hesitancy stems from the fact that it was a difficult year, socially, personally, culturally, and even politically as well. So I want to start our conversation this afternoon about the definition of vaccine hesitancy. The World Health Organization defines it as the lack of acceptance of vaccines despite availability of vaccination services. And if we understand this, we can understand what's underlying it, the determinants. and perhaps we can arrive at some potential strategies or solutions. Vaccine hesitancy is one of the top 10 threats to global health, as defined by the World Health Organization. And I want to remind everybody that vaccine hesitancy is not a new concept. It's been at play since the 18th century in Europe with the smallpox vaccine. Fast forward to the 20th century, we've had vaccine hesitancy with measles, smallpox, and polio pandemics. And to current day 2021, where patients, where our public, we're extremely well informed. We're taking healthcare into our own hands. We want knowledge, we want to see the data, and we want to do our own research. But we also know that we're going to run into social media sites that have misinformation or even disinformation that can give us pause and make us uncertain. Next slide, please. So when we think of vaccine hesitancy, it's important to understand that most of us don't think in this pure binary manner, that I'm pro-vaccine or I'm anti-vaccine. In fact, there's a spectrum of beliefs and behaviors between these two poles. On this continuum you see before you, on the far left here, on the light blue vertical rectangle, these are the people, the patients who accept all vaccines, and they do this willingly. They do this with confidence, and this creates a high demand situation. But as we move to the right, we start to see that acceptance begins to diminish. These are the hesitant people, and it's understandable. And if we go to the far right in the extreme, these patients in the dark blue circle, they refuse all vaccines, and they do it with conviction. And a vaccine hesitant person, it's important to remember that they can occupy different or even several different places along the spectrum you see. And if we marry this continuum with what we know from large studies and surveys, there are subtypes of people that land in each of these areas here. And so you'll see a similar spectrum. Next slide, please. So on the far left there are the enthusiasts. These are people that want the vaccine and they want it ASAP. On a scale of 1 to 10, the likelihood of them receiving it is about a 9.4. But as we move further right, we run into a group called the watchful. So now we're into the hesitant groups. And the watchful, this group wants to see their friends and perhaps even their relatives and their peers. They want to see them having a safe, positive vaccination experience before they commit. And on a scale of 1 to 10, in large surveys, they have a 5.0 chance of getting the vaccine. But the third group is what we call the cost anxious. This group believes that getting the vaccine comes with a cost. It can be time, it can be money, or it can be both. We know that the government is giving this to us as for free. But it still may be a cost as it relates to time to take off of work and perhaps the potential to take the next day off if you're having some of the known side effects. And their likelihood to get the vaccine is about a 4.2. Our next group to the right are what we call the system distrusters. These are people amongst all of us who believe that people of their own race or their ethnicity are not or have not been treated fairly by the healthcare system. And there are some very real examples that not only occurred in the past, but also occur to this day. You heard Dr. Dixon talk about healthcare disparities and inequities. Finally, this last group, a very important group, are what we call the COVID skeptics. This group is skeptical about COVID as a disease, and therefore they're really skeptical about the vaccine. They don't believe the threat. Studies show that 84% of this group generally believe in at least one conspiracy theory about COVID, and their likelihood to get the vaccine on a scale of 1 to 10 is a 2.3. So when we think about our goal to impact the pandemic through vaccinations. You go back one. We cannot take a one-size-fits-all approach and say that the vaccine is safe and that you need to trust it. We have to meet these groups of people where they are and address their concerns. Our strategies have to embrace and understand each person's perspective because they're real and they're important to address with respect and to communicate compassionately. Words are important, and how we deliver those words are really important. I think as Christians, we have a responsibility to communicate wisely and gently about sensitive topics like this. When we don't communicate gently and we don't communicate respectfully, the result is that it polarizes our communities and pulls us further apart. So let's look at some solutions. Next slide. So the enthusiasts, these are easy. We need to streamline the process and make it easy for them to get the vaccine, but we need to harness their enthusiasm and make it visible that they've received the vaccine. The next group, the watchful, what do we do with them? Well, we need to encourage sharing of their authentic stories about how they were initially hesitant about getting the vaccine and how they overcame it. We need to capitalize on positive social norms. These are the people that are still wearing masks. So they're altruistic in many other ways. This group also has the largest number seeking advice from doctors. So we need healthcare providers to speak to concerns about side effects, speak to them about that specifically. The next group is called the cost anxious. And in this cost anxious, we need to remind them that the vaccines are free. And also bring the vaccines to the people. Accessibility, it has a huge impact. This is the group of all those groups that are the least optimistic about their ease of getting vaccinated. We need to offer, if we can, paid time off to get the vaccine, to get both doses, and perhaps even to recover after they have a response. Essentially make the process easy, help them by filling out as much information as possible. The next group is called the system distrusters. The system distrusters, we need to organize listening sessions to hear community members' concerns to build trust and in the preferred languages of the community that we're talking about. Partner with trusted community providers to make sure that the locations that we choose for vaccinations are right. Use stories and make it visible that the community is getting vaccinated. And be completely transparent. Track and trend efforts for equity and vaccine distribution. And finally, the toughest group of all, these are the COVID skeptics. We need to look to trusted figures, hopefully non-political, and use vaccine ambassadors to mobilize this group, to have them think outside the box. And understand that solutions that work with others may not work here. We know that misinformation and disinformation is sticky and exerts influence even after we debunk the disinformation. The best approach is to lead with facts and explain how the information that they're sharing is misleading and reinforce the facts again. And finally, the last slide. Again, I think I just want to close by saying we need to meet the people where they are and embrace each other's perspectives by being respectful, compassionate, and loving. And with that, I want to pass the baton to my colleague, Dr. Asante Dixon. As you know, he is our chair of radiology at Adventist Healthcare White Oak Medical Center and the co-founder and president of Ascension Medical Education, Medical Educators. Thank you very much, Dr. Dixon.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. So in the next couple minutes, because we want to leave time for questions, I see some people asking questions in the chat. I'm going to try to have a conversation with you about healthcare equity and history of medicine in the United States, which likely contributes to some people being distrustful of the medical system and therefore distrustful of the vaccination programs that we're seeing coming on board. Healthcare equity is essentially an ideology that everybody is treated equally in the healthcare system. So regardless of sex, regardless of sex or gender, regardless of race, ethnicity, everybody should be treated equally. However, in the United States, we know that that is not the case. But if we look at it from a perspective of unification of goals, in other words, everybody in the United States benefits from healthcare being provided equally. Why? Because something as simple as racism, that is treating different patients differently based on the color of their skin, it is a huge financial drain on the country. So for example, if we were to void racism in medical practice, the United States, the gross domestic product would probably increase by half. Okay. And that is because the efficiency and the profitability of the system has an infinite potential if everybody is treated equally. You're decreasing the amount of people in the United States who are living while sick, because chronic illness only leads to increased days of missing work, lack of productivity, family generational wealth being affected because the breadwinners of the family are spending a significant amount of their time dealing with illnesses that prevent them from earning wages. And also, everyone in the system plays a role. And if certain members of the community cannot play their role in the proliferation of a functional society, then the society in general will suffer. And this is what I start off the talk with by saying that healthcare equity is something that we all benefit from. It should not be a you benefit, but I don't benefit. All boats will rise with this tide if we can achieve it. So for the purposes of this discussion, I will speak from the perspective predominantly of African Americans, because in this country, historically, African Americans have played a huge role in the development of the medical system that we know to be today. We're all familiar, or we should be familiar, with a lot of examples in which African Americans have been mistreated by the medical system. So briefly, we can talk about things like the Tuskegee experiment, very popularized in the past 30, 40 years, which was an experiment for 40 years in which sharecropper African Americans were allowed to be visualized but not treated for syphilis in an effort to try to understand how syphilis worked. So these men thought they were being treated, but they actually weren't, so that we could learn how syphilis works. Henrietta Lacks, an African-American woman in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, that had a cervical mass, and she went to Johns Hopkins University for treatment. At that time, in the 40s and the early 50s, Johns Hopkins was segregated, and she went to what was referred to as the Negro ward. And a piece of tissue was biopsied from her cervix, and that tissue has been used in the past decades to play a role in a lot of the scientific experimentation that has led to numerous drugs that we all have probably been exposed to or even used to this day. The problem is that she never gave consent for this, and her family now has been fighting to get access and ownership of her cells. And because her cells have created a multi-billion-dollar industry, her family has essentially been excluded from such rights. Historically, we want to think about the development of medicine in the United States as a system that came from a need. And the need was, unfortunately, to keep slaves alive. Native Americans were essentially decimated in the early parts of the 16th and 17th centuries, with continued decimation leading up into the 18th century. But African Americans being brought here in 1619 played a huge role in the development of medicine as we know it. Why? Because African Americans were the literal workforce of the country. Without the labor of African Americans, the United States would not have the power, the prowess, and the technology that it has developed over the centuries. Politicians, church members, scientists all work together to essentially create a medical system that kept African Americans alive just enough to do their plantation duties, but not give them the health care that they needed to actually advance psychosocially, because there was a fear that African Americans will become dependent on the system. And so this led the way for a system that essentially treated people unequally to benefit those on one side who wanted to maintain access, and to disadvantage those on the other side who were kept in a position where they could not benefit from access. So I'll give you some examples of how this works. So we all should do a little bit of research, if you can, on a doctor named Dr. Sims. He's called the father of OBGYN, gynecology and obstetrics. But most of the women here on this call, on this conference, who go to the gynecologist or have gone to an obstetrician, you are using methodologies, treatments, instruments that were actually founded by Dr. Sims. But Dr. Sims got his experience by experimenting on enslaved Africans with no consent, with no anesthesia. And a lot of that medical technology and medical know-how is actually brought to bear exactly what we have today, but it is unknown that a lot of this information came from misuse of medical ethics, integrity, and at the expense of enslaved African women. When we think about the vaccine today, many people are hesitant, as Dr. Ross stated, and they're hesitant for different reasons. Some are hesitant because by nature they are just not in belief that a man-made medication is safe for the human body. Others are hesitant because of the knowledge of the history of the United States using disadvantaged individuals, predominantly Black people, to experiment on. And I think in COVID, as it junctioned together with the George Floyd incident, and as Dr. Ross said, the past year has been an explosion of politicized information, medicine being no different. It brought together a huge amount of distrust amongst people of color. If you read the 1609 Project, if you read Medical Apartheid by Harriet Washington, a lot of the information that I'm kind of glossing over is given in laser-like detail, And I bring that out there because I want people to know that what I'm sharing with you is not something that I'm just making up. It is factual historical knowledge that I think that people need to be aware of in terms of understanding where a lot of the hesitancy comes from, as race and ethnicity in healthcare in the past year has become more of a focus. How do we diminish the gaps in healthcare provision in the United States? And with that comes an understanding of how did healthcare gaps get there in the first place. So I think that in the interest of time, I know we said 30 minutes of a presentation, we're at 40 minutes right now. I want to bring this information to you because you need to think about it in terms of your own perception of the vaccine, the perceptions of your family members and your friends, and also the perception of medicine, American medicine. So lastly, I'll give you an example. Historically, from the 16th, 16 and 1700s, there was no such thing as organized medicine. The way you were treated was you were treated by people who had knowledge of treatment of individuals, but there was no organized medicine. That didn't really start until the mid or late 1800s. But the suppression of Black bodies was actually an intricate part of medical training. It was very common to have medical schools that relied on Black slave bodies to serve as cadavers for medical students. It was very common for physicians and physician trainers and medical students to use Black cadavers in their offices to show patients what anatomy may have looked like. It was very common to have medical students walk around with the skeletons of enslaved Africans, and they exchanged them amongst other students as just a form of witty banter in order to show that they were part of an exclusive class, which were physicians. So this is really the beginning of a medical system that is incorporated within the suppression of Black people. And so that has come with us over centuries. Now, granted, it has improved significantly. I would not be sitting here as a physician trained in the United States if things were what it was 100 years ago, because I wouldn't have been allowed to train, to be frank. And this is where I come to the point of many of you are listening to me saying, well, how have things changed? Is it different? And I answer that as a Black physician by telling you that things have changed significantly. And that is because there has been more involvement of physicians of color. In any aspect of culture, if you are excluding the people that you are suppressing, inevitably that culture will not change. But over time, the number of Latino physicians, African American physicians, African physicians, and other minority physicians, including women of all races, as those numbers increase, the perception of value of patients will change, as will the healthcare being provided, because those individuals, of which I consider myself one, we will advocate for more equity. This has been the case in this vaccine production. Had this vaccine been created back in 1960, I, for one, probably would not have taken it, because I know that there were no African Americans involved in the creation of vaccines in the 1960s. But in 2019, 2020, you have African Americans that were not only providers, but were researchers. And with that, you have a more shielded medical ethical system and medical ethical value that is important to relay to everybody listening here. That this is not 1960, it's not 1860. However, there is still a lot of work to be done, and that's what we're sharing here, which is the progress of medical ethic in the past 100 years, 50 years, and even 10 years. This may convince some of you to consider or change the way you view your treatment, your role, or vaccination. Some of you will not be changed regardless of what we say. And that's understandable because the vaccine is not obligatory, it's a choice. But it's important that we have this conversation because we have to try to engage the variability of personalities and thoughts that are on this panel or on Facebook or in the conference, because we want to give information that is as plain and is as equal as we can provide so that you can make your own choices. So with that, I'll stop there. I know it was kind of quick. It's hard to run 500 years of history in just 10 or 15 minutes, but I want to speak to you from my heart and tell you that your choice is your choice, but make your choice with actual information that is factual and not politicized. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to add everyone back to the stream for questions. So I don't know if you all have been perusing the chat as I have. And I'm going to scroll back up to the top so that we can, go back to our first question. And thank you all for a very comprehensive presentation. That was great information. I learned a lot. And we want to take some of the questions coming from the chat. But before I display one of them, if you all have any comments that you particularly want to respond to that you've seen, you can do so at this time while I'm scrolling.
Latasha, I'll just speak also from my heart too. When these vaccines came out, I was not one of the people that necessarily said, I'm going to take it. I think that for me, I looked at the data and I asked myself and my family some questions about my age range and my risks, whether or not I have any comorbidities, what we call like diabetes, heart disease, and were these comorbidities and were different ethnicities and races included in these trials? And did they represent me? And do they represent us? And the answer to me was yes. I just wanted to dovetail with what Dr. Dixon said about that. Let's look at the data, keep this away from the politics, and really make an educated decision as an individual. So thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate you bringing that out. Go ahead.
I just want to add, just to piggyback off of both Dr. Dixon and Dr. Ross, I always knew that at some point I would be taking some sort of vaccination of sorts. But it was also really important for me to be able to see the evidence and the data. And as time has gone on, the data has become even more compelling. There are a lot of international studies, particularly in Israel, where we have a very successful vaccination program. So I feel really good about it. I also was looking to see for a very inclusive clinical trial. As Dr. Dixon is alluding to, I think there's room for improvement, but this was the most inclusive trial in the U.S. history. So feeling really good about that.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Okay, let's look at one of our questions. And we get these type of questions often in terms of people with specific illnesses and whether it's recommended that they take the vaccine. So we have this question from Dorothy, who's asking about her sister who has lupus, and she's asking if her sister could safely take the vaccine, and are there conditions where the COVID vaccines are actually contraindicated?
Okay, so I'd be happy to take this question. So for persons with immunocompromising conditions, it is important for you to speak with your doctor before taking the vaccination. The risk for immunocompromised people really is around vaccine efficacy, not necessarily the safety of the vaccine. Because some immunocompromising conditions interfere with what is called a cell-mediated immune response. It may create some challenges around whether the vaccine will work. And so talk to your physician who may refer you to an immunologist, but it is not a contraindication for taking the vaccination. The only true contraindication is if you have had a severe or immediate allergic reaction to the vaccine from a first dose or any of the components of the vaccination. But even if historically you have had allergic reactions to other vaccinations, that still is not a contraindication for the vaccine, but it is an indication for you to have a conversation with your physician.
Okay, thank you for that. Of course, we have a few people who have questions about those who have taken the vaccine and have had a bad reaction or even resulted in death. What is you all's response to that question?
You want to take that, Ada? I can say that there are those of us, myself included, who had reactions, and I was tired. I had pain in my arm. I had a headache, but it did not extend beyond a couple days. Now that's nothing in relation to death, and I completely understand that and respect that. But what I have seen is we were one of the busiest hospitals in the state of Maryland as it relates to COVID-19. And the death toll that we had, as many hospitals did as well, was astounding. And so I think when you're looking at statistics and opportunities for prevention, there are going to be a very, very small percentage of people that will pass away from vaccines and this vaccine. I know they're still looking at it and still publishing on it as well. Ada, did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the symptoms or reactions that you described, Dr. Ross, are very typical for people that have received the vaccination. But just want to remind everyone that that is a sign that the vaccine is working, that it is producing an immune response. Dr. Ross talked about some of the local site injection pain, but then you might have more systemic reactions such as a fever or tiredness. I do want to take a moment to just sort of talk about some of the more severe side effects that have come to light about both the Johnson & Johnson vaccination as well as the RNA, Moderna, and Pfizer vaccinations. I do want to reiterate that these side effects are rare. They're still documented as rare, but there are some correlates related. If we start with Johnson & Johnson, if you are a woman under the age of 50, they have been able to find a correlation between the taking that vaccination and something called thrombocytopenia or blood clots. And so it is a rare occurrence. It happened about among 7. I think the current statistic is 7 in 1 million. So if that is a concern to you, you do have other options, and you can talk to your physician about them. Additionally, there have been some recent reports about I just sort of had a brain freeze right there. There have been some recent reports of cardio inflammation associated with the mRNA vaccination in young adults, young male adults. I think there are just over 300 confirmed cases, and that is associated with the RNA vaccination. But I'd like to remind everyone that over 300 million doses of vaccinations have been distributed. And so these side effects, although serious, are rare. I don't want to dance around the fact that since the vaccination started in December of 2020, there have been just over 5,000 deaths. But after looking at the data to see if there's any correlation between those deaths and the use of the vaccination, they have found none.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. You want to add on something?
Yeah, I want to. I'm looking through the chat. I'm seeing a recurring theme here, which is that the question is, how come nobody's discussing natural remedies? And I want to say that, how should I put it? We are not discussing natural remedies because we have trained in what is referred to as an allopathic system. So MDs, we are allopathic doctors. A lot of medicine is based on allopathic science, right? Research, science, medication, drugs. So we don't have a lot of information to prove or disprove the efficacy of natural remedies. I will say that I would not say to you that if you have a natural remedy that is proven to be effective against COVID, that you shouldn't use it. And the reason I wouldn't say that is because I don't have the data to support that. I don't have the data to oppose you. And many American scientists don't have the data to support or oppose natural remedies. So I'm trying my best to address, I see at least 10 or 12 comments here about natural remedies. And I wanted to say that we are not the natural remedy experts because we don't have the natural remedy research. And we don't want to be here just speculating about things. We want to be able to talk to you about research that is in existence and facts and information that we can reproduce to share with you.
Thank you. I appreciate you.
And if I can just follow up there, Adventist healthcare is based upon the foundation of the Adventist approach for health, and that is sunlight, fresh air, food, water, a healthy lifestyle. So you won't find bigger advocates to help our immune system stay robust and ready. But just that healthiness and living a good life and a good lifestyle in and of itself, if you are exposed to this significant COVID virus, can lead to morbidities and eventually death. We see this in our hospital. And so, as Dr. Dixon said, I would love to see more research. And I agree with you in the chat here, Dorothy, that we would love to see more research on this. But for what we have today, I think the significant plan, the best plan is to at least consider this vaccine. Yes, there have been some missteps among pharmaceutical companies. We know this, but what we have in front of us is a set of research that gives us confidence, at least. Again, you have to make your own decisions.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate that. And since we were talking just about some of the side effects, I wanted to bring back another question about that. This is coming to us from Faye. She's wondering, we talked about the side effects that happen shortly after getting the vaccine, but she's wondering if it's possible to have side effects 2 to 3 months following getting the vaccine.
So I could probably take this one. Historically, most vaccines show side effects within 6 to 8 weeks, which is a standard that the FDA requires manufacturers to demonstrate before putting a vaccine on the market. So far, given people have taken the vaccination since December, we have not seen long-lasting side effects aside from the thrombocytopenia that I described in the Johnson & Johnson vaccination and the cardiac inflammation that I described for the RNA vaccinations, which happened within weeks of receiving the second shot. So I would like to say that the data does not demonstrate so far any long-term effects.
Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Dixon.
Again, I'm just trying to keep up with the chat. The chat is moving hard and heavy, and I'm just trying to address some of these things. I'm sorry, I missed naturopathic vaccinations, medical treatment. Okay, what I wanted to say is let's not misunderstand something. Whether or not you are taking a vaccine that was made in a lab, or you are using natural remedies, if you have underlying illness, poor health, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, whether you take a drop of lemon juice with sugar that has proven to prevent the likelihood of you getting bad COVID or not, or you took Johnson & Johnson, those comorbidities will increase the chances that if you get COVID-19 or any other virus, you will be more likely to suffer significant illness from that viral infection, whether you take a natural remedy or Pfizer. So as Dr. Ross said, a lot of us are kind of missing the boat, which is that, well, what he alluded to is that we're missing the boat in that basic health is important for fighting disease, any type of disease. But a vaccine in of itself or a natural remedy in of itself, if you have horrible health, is not going to save you from being killed by that virus, because your health is baseline horrible. And this is where healthcare equity has a major role, because we are seeing certain populations within the United States have significantly worse baseline health. So when those populations get sick, whether they're taking Johnson & Johnson or the lemon juice, and I'm not saying lemon juice, I'm making up lemon juice. That's a total makeup. I'm not saying lemon juice is it, right? You are more likely to end up sick, hospitalized, on a ventilator, or die. So we really need to address our baseline health. And I agree with somebody who said, I think the next time your organization does this, you should bring on some specialists in naturopathic medicine and have them give their perspectives on it, and maybe give have a little talk about that, because it's good for everybody to hear about it.
Right.
Yeah, just to build on what Dr. Dixon is saying, I definitely agree that it's important to be healthy so that your immune system is better equipped to fight infectious disease. But I do want to say that we can't get away from the fact that immunity is actually the result of a physiologic response to an infectious pathogen. And there is a very specific immune response that's cell-mediated, that's required to give you long-lasting immunity. And this is what we hope to achieve by the vaccine, and this is what the current data tells us and informs us around preventing COVID-19.
If I can add, Latasha, please. I first of all, this discussion is great. The questions are even greater. This is exactly what we want. We want a respectful conversation with the community. I will say that it's not, and Dr. Dixon mentioned that it's really important if we have heart disease or high blood pressure or diabetes to get the vaccine, because you may end up on a ventilator. But even if you don't have, and you're healthy, if you're blessed by God with that, there is an element of a need for our population to still receive the vaccine if you decide to do so, which will help our community, and it will help achieve us achieving herd immunity, so we don't spread it to those with heart disease, so we don't spread it to those with diabetes, and to my grandparents and to your grandparents as well. I think that there's an important commitment that we have as Christians to at least consider it from that perspective. That comes from my heart.
Thank you for that. We appreciate that. Now, there's some questions about whether or not the vaccine is still considered experimental or in clinical trial. Can you all clarify that?
So we're still in an evaluation period. None of the vaccines have passed the scrutiny of the biologics license application. The only manufacturer that has done that through the FDA is the Pfizer biotech vaccination. So we're literally 7 months in. I would not say that it is experimental. There is a lot of data to support the use of the vaccination, which is what got it to the point of emergency use. But we're still finding out lots of new information about COVID-19. The data is still emerging, but so far the data around vaccinations has been positive, particularly as we fight these new variants that are circulating. Some of the early data that we've been able to see with the Delta variant is that states that have a particularly low vaccination rate are having a new incidence or new pockets of COVID-19 resurgence. So in states like Missouri or Utah, Arkansas, they're seeing an increase in COVID cases.
We do expect FDA approval sometime between September and January, maybe as early as this summer. But in a recent FDA meeting, those were the dates that were given. And I would say we continue to be in this evaluation period, as Adam mentioned. We're still looking to see, how long does immunity last? And when will we need our booster? We don't know the answer to that yet, but we likely will. There's also several groups, several research companies that are looking at conjugating, meaning putting together the COVID vaccine with the flu vaccine, so we can go in and get receive both at the same time. The initial data looks very encouraging that they don't interact with each other as well, and so that's encouraging.
Okay, thank you.
I saw somebody ask, do you need a vaccine to travel?
Right.
The answer is you don't need a vaccine to travel, but you need a negative COVID test. Okay, wait. All right. There's travel in the United States, and then there's international travel. So if you're traveling in the United States, you do not need a vaccine and you do not need a COVID test. If you're traveling internationally, those countries that are actually receiving visitors and tourists, most of them are requiring that you have a COVID test that is done within 24, 48, or 72 hours before arriving in the country. And then when you leave to return to the United States, you have to get another COVID test to prove that you're negative returning to the United States. Some countries have a mandatory quarantine where when you arrive in the country, you must stay in a certain area, hotel, for up to 14 days. and similarly when you're leaving. So the best thing to do is wherever you're planning to travel internationally, you have to do some serious research to find out when your COVID test needs to be acquired. Is there a quarantine in that country? And lastly, there are certain countries on the United States list that when you return from said country, you are considered high risk because of the high rates of COVID in that country. And you may be quarantined here in the United States, regardless of your test results, because that country has such a high COVID rate.
Thank you. Appreciate that clarification. And I just, I'm also browsing the chat, and I just wanted to make a note for those who may have joined us a little later. I still see some comments about, natural remedies and, bringing on other professionals. And we will do that, and that we will have other forums that address that. This forum has come as a direct request that we have received. So we're addressing that request that we received for information regarding the vaccine. And now we will respond in a future discussion with those who may offer some of those natural remedies that you're talking about. I just wanted to give us context so that we're not, in having this discussion, we're not counteracting anything natural. But this particular discussion is coming from this medical panel. So I just wanted to put our viewers at ease in that regard so that we can get a couple more questions before we have to close. So go ahead, Dr. Ross.
So there's a question here that I know we have experienced in the acute care hospitals across our state of Maryland, and it says, "What about?" Rudolph asked the question. It's a great question, Rudolph. What about if you have the antibodies? Do you still need to take the vaccine? That's a great question. What we found is the people that may have had a mild, moderate, or even severe case of COVID still benefit from taking the vaccine because we know that the vaccines are effective against the variants. Okay, so it really is going to provide that extra boost and against the variants. And what I might ask Ada to do is to speak to the patients that we have seen in the hospitalized and with COVID these days, in this kind of last maybe 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and the association between lack of vaccination and vaccination. Ada, can I ask you to talk to that?
Sure, I'd love to. So in the state of Maryland, about 70% of the population has received at least one dose of COVID vaccination. And although we have not done an official study to look at this, some of the trends that we've seen is as the vaccination rate went up in Maryland, so did our COVID positives begin to diminish dramatically. We've had a number of days, 2 or 3, maybe even 4 or 5 days, where we've had 0 COVID positive patients come into the hospital for admission. Where we do find positives, even among our employees, are people who have not been vaccinated. And on occasion, we find people that may be reinfected with COVID after an initial infection. And so that kind of speaks to a little bit around the question about, if I had COVID before, am I protected in the future? And I don't know that we have enough data to say that you are.
Okay, Dr. Dixon, you see some more?
Keeping up, trying to keep up here.
Yeah, it's a lot in the chat.
Someone said, "Why are you all pushing the vaccine?" So I just want to remind that person that in the beginning we made sure that we said emphatically that we are not here pushing the vaccine. We are here giving information, and we are asking you all to make your own decisions as to whether or not you want to take the vaccine or not. We are not pushing the vaccine. Second, immunity. I saw somebody ask about herd immunity. Herd immunity is when a certain percentage of the population becomes exposed and essentially becomes immune to or has been exposed to a virus or a bacteria, to the point where you decrease the amount of significant illness because you've got enough people exposed to the virus. The vaccine is not the only way to achieve herd immunity. In our lives every day, we are achieving herd immunity by being exposed to bacteria and viruses every single day. And so the question that a lot of us have gotten mixed up in is that happened in COVID is the phrase herd immunity was taken as a way of killing people, right? So now this is my perspective. What I saw on the news and the media was if you were stating 6 or 7 months ago that you wanted not to take the vaccine, but you wanted to achieve herd immunity naturally, you oftentimes were attacked as being caustic and not altruistic and not sympathetic, right? But the truth is, you can achieve herd immunity or achieve a certain percentage of the population being exposed to a virus naturally without any vaccination. It will take more time because it potentially may happen. It's happening at its own rate as opposed to putting people in line and getting shots in the arm. But that is absolutely true that you can get and achieve herd immunity without the vaccine as well.
Okay, thank you for that. We have a few more. Well, we have a lot more questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them. They're all great questions. But go ahead, Dr. Ross. Do you see something you want to address?
I do, and because it dovetails nicely with exactly what Dr. Dixon just mentioned, and
okay, go ahead.
It comes from Batman the Light Knight, which I just love that name, and so he asks, how can a vaccine meant to boost your natural immune system be better than your immune system? And this works well with with what Dr. Dixon just mentioned, and that is, you're exactly right. However, if you have a COVID infection, there is a significant chance that you are going to not survive if you get the COVID infection. However, if you have this vaccine that's meant to boost your natural immune system, the chance of you passing away it's so rare. And what it does is it primes your immune system's pump, so that when and if, and hopefully it's only if, you do get exposed and infected to COVID, that it's a minor illness, if an illness at all. So that's how a vaccine meant to boost your immune system is better than you getting it and then developing antibodies. Because from day one that you are exposed and infected, you are able to fight it. Whereas if you get COVID as the virus, it's going to take your body several days, if not weeks, if not months, to react and to develop your antibodies to this potentially deadly virus.
Okay, thank you.
I was just going to say, just to dovetail off of what Dr. Ross is saying, I'm seeing a few questions in the chat about viral shedding, and I don't know that I could totally answer some of these questions, but what we do know is that at least with the Pfizer vaccination, that it reduces the number of asymptomatic cases. And so, as many of you may know, early in the pandemic, there was a thought that asymptomatic transmission really drove the spread of COVID-19. And so we have some data at least to support that getting a vaccination does in fact reduce your ability to transmit the virus and then to also carry it asymptomatically.
Okay, thank you for answering that, because I did see a couple of questions about whether if you had the vaccine, can you still carry it to others, and you addressed that. Okay, so we are at 3:19. We're going to give this 5 more minutes to see if we can just answer as many questions as we can, kind of in rapid fire. And you all have been doing an awesome job of helping me look through the chat and picking out what seems to be some of the hot questions. Go ahead, Dr. Ross. You see another good one?
Yeah, I do. This one asks about what, and as a hospital administrator, I feel comfortable addressing this. What is our plan around mandating vaccines amongst our employees? And so what we plan on doing, in fact, the entire state of Maryland through the umbrella of what we call the Maryland Hospital Association, have all signed on to say, look, we need to be a safe place for our patients, for our community to come in and receive care. So if you come in and you have cancer, or you come in and you have heart disease, or what other, into our emergency department, my expectation, if my family's coming in there, is that the doctors and the nurses and the respiratory therapists will not be infecting me. So my expectation is a little bit higher as healthcare providers. So yes, we will be, for new employees, we are going to start requiring, as a condition of employment, the COVID vaccination. Johns Hopkins Hospital, Frederick Memorial Hospital, and several others have already done this. Ours will begin in the next several weeks. And then what we're going to do is, once it is FDA approved, fully FDA approved, then what we will have is a time period after that approval process that we will all need to be vaccinated so we can provide what we call God's care to our patients.
Okay, thank you for addressing that. Dr. Dixon, I see it in your face. Go ahead.
I see Mark W. says, I'll post the prevention and cure of this virus and all diseases and viruses. Right. So I don't know if that post is coming for us to see, but I think that everybody is going to have a perspective on how best to approach COVID-19 and viruses similar. I agree with what everybody's saying, which is that we should have more natural doctors on here and other perspectives. We will take that into consideration. But I want to remind everybody that just like any other aspect of life, you need to do research and figure out who you're listening to and what information you are using to make decisions about your health and the health of your family and your community. Every bit of information cannot be force-fed to you. Some of the action has to be on your side in terms of making decisions. When your children are born, physicians will say they should be immunized against mumps, measles, rubella. You have to make a decision whether or not you want to immunize your children. I would love to know how many of you on here have your children immunized, or have you chosen not to immunize your children? And if they're not immunized, I just would be interested. Okay, these are rhetorical questions because there's no way we can have these type of conversations, but the decision has to be yours, and you have to make it based on facts, and you have to make it based on perspectives. And I ask you all to keep that in mind as you're listening to a variety of different sources give you information. And lastly, I say, this is a particularly interesting point in American history, in that not just the vaccine, but even something as simple as to wear a mask or not to wear a mask, that turned into a Republican and Democratic face-off. And I myself watched that for a year, and even still to this day, you're seeing people fight over mask wearing. And you have to be very careful, because now you're losing the forest for the trees, if you will. And so I empathize with a lot of you who are literally confused, because we're at a stage now where we can't just talk about, well, A, B, and C. A, B, and C is now being modified oftentimes based on who the message or where the message is coming from. And I understand that. And I just ask you all to just take an extra bit of caution when people are telling you, including us, right? And do your own research. And the books that somebody asked where the information I got, I gave you Harriet Washington, Medical Apartheid. Look it up yourself. Don't just take my word for it. And you make the decision based on the book and the references. There are copious references there as to whether or not you believe what I'm telling you. We are not pushing information on people for you to take. And obligatory, somebody asked, will the vaccine become obligatory? I will say vaccines have never been obligatory in the United States in terms of if you don't get it, you'll be thrown out of the country. But you can see that there are certain private institutions already. There are certain colleges, universities who are saying that they are looking to mandate vaccines for students to come back to campus. Whether you agree or disagree, we won't argue that, but that's to answer your question. So on a federal level, they won't obligate, but there are certain private institutions who have the right to say, you want to work here or go to school here, you must be vaccinated.
Okay, thank you. All right. Any, we want to end around 3:30. We know this is the type of discussion that we could probably have for hours because there are varied opinions. And, the thing about any discussion of this type, it really boils down to respecting people's own their research and the decisions that they make. I think sometimes we get into this tug of war of right and wrong. What may be right for one individual may not be right for all. And I think we have to get to that point where we respect everyone's decision, whether it's to take the vaccine or to abstain from it. Okay. Any closing remarks? I want to give you guys time to share anything that you don't want to leave kind of open-ended as we close this discussion. Anything that you want our viewing audience to know as it relates to this discussion. Obviously, you've seen the comments. There's a lot. And I want to thank you all. You've been very, I'm sure you guys get questions all the time, but probably not as rapid fire as you have today. So we appreciate you all addressing some of the questions as they come up. But I really want to give you a chance to share some closing remarks or anything that you want to leave with our viewers today.
Sure, I guess I'll go ahead and start it. That's okay. I just want to thank all of you for the opportunity to speak with you and for all of your questions. I think your questions help us to get better and to look at other ways to potentially address COVID. I will say this past year has really been a lesson in faith for me. And I know that God gives us everything we need, gives us the knowledge we need to live and live a holy life. And I'm so grateful to be here. I, like many of you, I was, the future seemed kind of cloudy, but I have full confidence and full faith that we're going to be okay, vaccine or not. So thank you all.
Thank you.
And first of all, and I'll go next, Latasha, and I can't thank you enough for this opportunity to speak with the group here, and I'll take Kim's question real quickly. Did all of us receive the immunization? I can confidently say yes, we did. I think that it's very important that we continue this dialogue and continue a respectful Christian-based conversation. The Adventist health message and current church policies support vaccination if you choose to have this. But I also want to make sure you understand, again, just reiterate that we're not pushing this. What we're doing is giving you our thoughts and our reflections and combining those with what we see on the front line. All three of us, 5 to 7 days a week, are in an acute care hospital, one of the busiest hospitals in the state of Maryland when it came to our first and second waves of COVID. And so when we were asked to do this, we were honored and we were privileged, and because it is so important. So our job here isn't to hit anybody over the head and say you must do this. It's really to guide and hopefully provide an assist. And as Asante Dixon mentioned, do your own research and you'll have to, and you do make your own decision. You guys are bright people, I can tell. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. Ross. Dr. Dixon, anything else before we close?
No, I've pretty much, I'm just looking up. Somebody says,
stop looking. You have to stop looking.
I'm trying to research. Somebody asked a question. I was trying to look it up really quick, but look, at the end of the day, there are potentially hundreds of people on this call. And therefore, just statistically, there are going to be different perspectives on vaccination. We all know that if we put 3 people in a room and ask them, what they think of the room, it's unlikely that all 3 people are going to have the same opinion of the room. This is just statistics. It's just going to happen this way. Right. So don't feel bad that you have comments here that are kind of some are left, some are right, some are up, some are down. It's just the nature of opinion and perspective. And that is normal. So, welcome that. I reiterate that a couple of things. One is use your heterogeneity. I'm looking at some of the names here, and I'm seeing that these are names of people that may be immigrants and may be coming from other countries. Ask them, what is life like for vaccination historically in your country? How does your history, how does your experience in your country or in your family's country play a role in your vantage points and where you position yourself here in the United States when it comes to vaccination, right? Everybody is not born and bred in the United States. I see a lot of names here that people are probably not born here. And if they are, they come from families coming from other places. Ask them these questions, have the conversations, because our experiences often play a role in how we view challenge, right? So you can use that heterogeneity here positively to engage people in more discussion, right? And lastly, no, unvaccinated people cannot get COVID from vaccinated people, in that the vaccine is not a vessel that is giving people COVID to spread it to other individuals who are not vaccinated. It doesn't work like that. Even vaccinated people can get COVID infection. But as Dr. Rost alluded to some time ago, if you have an immune boosted system from a vaccination, it is highly unlikely that you would become markedly ill. You may be asymptomatic, or you may be minimally ill if you're vaccinated and you got infected again, as opposed to if you were not vaccinated and you were not exposed naturally in the past, the likelihood of you becoming significantly ill is higher. But no, the vaccine doesn't make you a vessel to infect unvaccinated people. Thank you so much for your time, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all. And we have lots of people thanking you all for the information that you shared today. And I echo those sentiments. We appreciate you, like I said before, taking the time to just have the conversation with us. We want to thank everyone in the chat. I know we weren't able to address every single question or every single comment, but it's great to have this healthy dialogue. And we thank you all for being a part of it. Thank you so much. We salute you for what you do every day. We want to say we appreciate the work that you're doing at the White Oak Medical Center. And we pray that the Lord will continue to bless all of you and what you do on a daily basis.
Thank you.
All right. And we like to seal things with a word of prayer. So we're just going to seal this conversation today, but with a closing prayer. Father, we just thank you for this opportunity to dialogue. We thank you for the wisdom that you have given your children. We ask that you will please lead and guide us as each one goes to make their own personal decision about the vaccine or any other decision in life. Father, we thank you for giving us the ability to choose, and we ask that you will guide each of us in our decision making. Thank you for this wonderful panel. We ask that you will bless them in a special way for what they've done for us today. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
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 Thank you all. Thank you all. And to our Allegheny East Conference family, our closing activities for camp meeting, we have our youth service that will be coming up at 5:00. And then our finale concert will conclude our AEC camp meeting 2021. So we hope you'll come back and join us at 5:00 on Facebook and YouTube. And again at 6:00 for our finale concert. Thanks again, White Oak Medical Center panel. Thank you for all you do. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.